Hello and welcome to today's webinar, New Strategies for Successful Documentum Integrations, Migrations, and Performance Management. I'm Frank Daves, VP of Marketing here at Correlsense, and on behalf of everyone here at Correlsense as well as Portford Solutions, welcome to our seminar today. Before we get started today, I just wanted to go through, go back up for a second, the agenda for the day. We'll begin the presentation today talking a little bit about the challenges of managing Documentum environments, particularly around performance. Then we'll move into some strategies which you can use in your day-to-day life to try to improve the performance and your success with Documentum. We'll then dive into a case study with a British company that can illustrate some of the ways that people are managing performance. And finally, we end it with a Q&A, your questions and answers. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to do our best to try to keep this around 30 minutes. I'll probably be plus or minus. That'll give you some time back for the second half of the hour. As we're going through the presentation, feel free to stop at any time and pop a question into the chat window. We're glad we'll try to answer them along the way. If not, we'll definitely try to answer them at the end. And finally, we will make the slides available tomorrow on Correlsense.com, and also Tom McEwen, who's our marketing manager, producer for today from Correlsense, will be sending those to you by email. Before we get started, I just wanted to introduce the speakers today. First of all, our guest speaker, Bruce Bolton, EVP of Technology and Consulting at the Portford Service Group. He has over 10 years of experience in installing and managing Documentum systems. And Tom Batchelor, Senior Solutions Architect here at Correlsense, who has great experience in implementing performance management systems in Documentum environments. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce, who's going to talk about Documentum challenges.
Thanks, Frank. So just go to the next slide here. I want to really talk about two main challenges during my part here, which is low-level system monitoring and system troubleshooting, which really kind of go hand in hand in a lot of Documentum environments. So let's talk about the Documentum architecture a little bit, because it can be quite complex, even in a small environment. So I've classified the environments as small and large, pretty generic. But one of the things that we find is that there's a multi-server deployment in any Documentum architecture. And if I go to the next slide here, we can talk a little bit about the small environments. And this is, you kind of a base Documentum architecture. We have the web application at the front end managing a webtop or Documentum administrator, which is the webtop being the main user access point for documents and metadata. We have the transformation server converting things to PDF, and we have the content server, the database server, which is the main hub of all the transaction requests that happen from all servers. So, and we've got the full text server underneath. So really the web transformation server and the full text server all drive their transactions through the content server to the underlying database. So that's really the main transaction flow in a small environment. For larger environments, it does get a little bit more complicated. Just go to my next slide here. So in larger environments, you have a high availability built in. So obviously you may want redundancy built into some of the servers. You may want load balancing. But everything that you're doing is basically complicating the architecture for good reason. Obviously we want it to perform the best way it possibly can. But this compounds the monitoring challenges and the troubleshooting challenges, because we need to understand exactly the click-through of a transaction from where the user starts from webtop right back through to the underlying database as well. So, Documentum is a very powerful architecture that supports, very large corporations, around the world. And so going from a small environment to a very large environment can be done and scaled up as organizations grow. So my next slide here, just go back one slide, we talk about the configuration architecture underneath the web top. So when you actually click in web top, it can go through many different tiers. So if we're requesting a document to be transformed from Word to PDF, or requesting attributes, or whatever that might be, requesting a full text search, you've got different servers involved. And if you've customized your application, which is quite common, then you may have Java methods running on the server, or running as part of a type-based object or a server-based object, and you may actually have web top customizations as well. So you're adding extra layers in there to monitor and troubleshoot when users are actually clicking from web top and going back through down to the underlying the underlying architecture. So customization methods, and we talked about those in the previous slide, the Java methods, the TBOs, and the SBOs, that what they do is provide hooks that you can put elements into your document processing. So when a user checks in a document or promotes it on a life cycle or whatever that might be, you can put a hook in there to provide some customization. But sometimes it's difficult to know what happens before and after the customization, so you can really understand the impact of what you're doing in the overall scheme of things. And also, the servers can play different parts in the role of customizations as well, because they're deployed to a number of servers depending on what the customization you're doing. If you're hooking into a rendering event, it may live on a different server than maybe some other transactions. So the problem is understanding exactly where some of these customizations are being originated from. Again, that's part of some of the monitoring challenges as well. So let's talk about those monitoring challenges with Documentum. Load balancing, production operation. So in a normal production environment, you need to make sure you're monitoring the load on any particular one of the servers. So whether it's a transformation server, a full text server, or whatever that might be, any one of those needs to be obviously balanced correctly in order to make sure that the users are getting the information they need when they need it. You may need temporary load balancing as well. We work with a lot of large-scale document migrations where it's just impossible to do it outside of production hours, so we have to put temporary load balancing to manage the document migration basically during production hours because it's such a high volume. So that's another challenge that can be put into the mix as well. Problem root cause is a challenge. Obviously, errors often manifest themselves in logs or in a user interface, but really understanding where that problem originated is a challenge and is definitely needed because there's different components and moving parts in the architecture. And the analysis as well, just understanding what's happening in your environment underneath the surface. So we're not talking about the services and things like that. We're talking about the transactions underneath the hood of Documentum, and analyzing exactly what's going on the lower level can be difficult today without something like Correlsense because you don't have the visibility at that lower level, which you'll see during the presentation in the next part. And requesting the source, where was it coming from when we got the error? So sometimes on a log you'll see a transaction that's got a Java error or something, but it's sometimes very difficult to pick through and find out where that originated from, what user's desktop, what were they actually doing before the error happened. So that's kind of some of the challenges that we face in monitoring. So let's talk about some strategies for success on how you can kind of, set yourself up to make sure that you're best placed to put the foundation to manage these type of situations. And really it all starts with design and really understanding the nature of users' requests. And this is quite important, and it sounds quite obvious, but really we're talking this at a much more detailed level. So it's, working with users to really understand what they're doing on a day-to-day basis can help you anticipate the load on the system. Are they routing a lot of documents for workflow, for example? Are they viewing a lot of documents? Are they requesting a lot of documents to be transformed to PDF? That will understand that sort of the rule of thumb of what they're actually using so you can identify where the load's going to be. When you're sizing servers, consider your customizations as well. That's something that people don't often do. But customizations obviously have an impact, and that impact needs to be built in when you're sizing your servers to make sure that you're taking that into consideration. And the impact of large-scale migrations as well. Obviously, we talked about our scenario earlier of managing large-scale migrations, during production, and this is possible, but you need to clearly understand the implementation of the impact of doing that, what maybe some temporary servers or resources while that migration is going on to manage it appropriately. And implement a rollback strategy as well. So obviously, if things maybe are being executed in your customizations and the server times out because they're overutilized, good practice suggests that you implement some sort of rollback strategy so you don't have what we call dirty data in your system where documents get into a state where they run basically half your customizations and not the other half. So that's just some design concepts. And then we move ramp up versus normal production. Understand what your business is going to do immediately after go live, which can be slightly different than what's going to happen in normal production. Again, they may be doing migrations or maybe doing data entry or actually reviewing a large number of documents. There may be a slightly different ramp up time versus normal production. And identify areas and time requirements as well. So just to identify these different areas in the system that you may need to focus on during that ramp up. And analyze the results. Bottlenecks do not always mean that the server needs more horsepower. So when you look at something like Correlsense, it's going to give you that valuable information of identifying maybe a bottleneck on one of the transform servers. It's being overloaded. But always look at the customizations first and the configurations, because there may be something in there that you're putting in to cause the bottleneck rather than just going into adding servers and resources. So always look to refine configurations and customizations first before jumping and adding horsepower, because there can be a lot done with customizations, because now you've got this real-time Correlsense data of what's actually happening in the system. It's a great platform for customization and refinement. And monitor continuously. So what we find is, as different projects and business objectives change with Documentum system, it is a business application after all, then obviously that may have a different impact with your system. So you may have to, sorry, let me go back there. You may have to refine that and constantly make refinements to your configurations and your resources as you go through. So obviously you've got your production monitoring, you've designed the system correctly, monitoring that on a continual basis to make sure you're aligning the resources to the business requirements is something that is definitely required here.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to move on and take a look at a case study of a deployment of the Correlsense solution onto a Documentum platform. And we'll talk about some of the advantages and some of the challenges that they face, and then we'll have a look at some of the data that we have and walk through some of the things we're able to show. So just one second. Okay. So the example we're going to look at is a large transportation firm in the United Kingdom. They've been a Documentum user for 9 years. And during those 9 years, as you would expect, their systems have gone through a number of changes. There's been different upgrades, customizations have been added, load from the business has increased, and there's been migrations of infrastructure and all the types of things that we have with an application as we live with that from year to year. It's an application that was facing some significant performance issues. And had performance issues in various different points. But the challenge they had is no one really knew. There's a lot of suspicions about where issues were. There's a lot of suspicions about what the cause of things was. But it was taking a lot of time to go through and validate those. And nothing was really given them the information that they needed to really understand what was the performance they were getting right now, where was that time being spent, and then be able to make informed decisions about what action to take. Also, they're in a position of migrating a big infrastructure migration as well. So they need to understand before and after performance the impact that's going to have, and make sure they're having a positive impact on the application and not having a detrimental impact with the changes that they're making. So as we move on, so some of the further challenges they have, so the EMC offers support, but clearly when you have customizations, when you have multiple other pieces of integration infrastructure, it's really difficult to actually identify sort of which components are at fault. Documentum used across their entire business. So we're talking several thousand users of this Documentum installation, so it's a pretty critical application to them. Again, if we go back and have a look at the content server, it's something that's difficult to monitor. There are some great tools out there that can monitor the web top pieces. Once we start moving into the more C-based components, there's very few products out there that are able to interrogate those, understand how transactions are flowing across them, and give us that full end-to-end view so we can really understand where we're spending our time, and then the tools to help us analyze and make sense of that data. So the solution is application performance management, and indeed, obviously these people chose SharePath. Oops. The reason that they selected the Correlsense solution, first of all, ability to provide that visibility into the content server, particularly be able to understand the DQL statements that are going into there and how they're being broken down and how they're being processed. We're very easy to implement, quick to get up and running, quick time to value. No one wants to spend a lot of time deploying a monitoring solution. Monitoring solutions should be easy to install so everyone can then focus on keeping an application running and improving their application. And we're able to give them that visibility into the content server, but into the web top pieces as well, which in this case is sitting at WebLogic. And not just that, also into the end user piece as well. Understand the impact that the network's having, understand how much time they're actually spending in the user's browser. So really true end-to-end visibility. So let's go through and let's take a look at the data that provides us. So I'm going to start with this screen, which is an SLA dashboard. The view that we have here, we can see we've got a number of different transaction types. But what we're really looking at here is all the different types of requests that we have coming in from the end users into the top of the stack. So through into our web server, through into our application server, into our web top. And this starts to give us some of the information that Bruce has been talking about. We can understand the different types of requests that we have coming from our end users. We can understand how frequently they occur. We can understand the response times that we're getting. So even at this stage, we're beginning to get a real feel of how our environment is used and how the actual users are engaging with Documentum and what transaction types and what things are actually going ahead and doing. So we can take this high-level information and then we can start to break this down in a number of different ways. First thing I want to have a look at here is a transaction model. So the transaction model takes a given transaction type. In this case, we're looking at the object list. And this breaks down what tiers do we touch, how much time do we spend on them, what does that look like. So here we can see in this case we spend nearly 3/4 of our time in the content server, spend about 1/4 of our time in the website application server, and a little bit of time in the database in this case. So just to break out where we're spending our time. We can then drill down into this further if we like. And we can then start to see, for example, let's go into the database. So for the SQLs that are coming from the content server into Oracle, what do those queries look like? How often do they occur? This is useful so we can start to understand and particularly pick apart. We can fairly easily understand if we got the response time we're getting through, but can we break that down between the content server and the database? Maybe we actually need to do some work with the database to improve the performance there. We can then start to go through, we can then start to perform certain types of analysis as well. The view that we're looking at here, we call this SLA Analysis. And this allows us to compare side-by-side transactions which meet the SLA against transactions which do not and see where they're spending our time. Here in this view, we can see that when we exceed the SLA, we're certainly spending some time on the database server. And we're actually spending nearly an extra second on the content server in this case as well. So we can see how that's breaking down, see where we're spending that time, and then take action accordingly. I think it's worth noting we can also produce similar types of views to this for doing time period comparisons. On this particular site, this has been very useful as they've been changing some of their infrastructure in response to the data they've been collecting with the Correlsense SharePath software. Those changes get made, they get implemented out of hours, but then there's a need to validate that that change had a positive effect. And SharePath is a great tool to be able to do that time period comparison and just make sure the change you've made is positive. And if it's not positive, then you have time to go ahead and back that out before load really starts to ramp up on the system. So it's great we have to do the comparisons, but let's really get down into some detail and have a look at some individual requests. So this we can see here, this is a list of every single, in this particular time period, in this particular environment, every single object list transaction that we've had. We can produce these lists based on specific users or various different types of things. So this is very powerful. We don't need to have a persistent issue to be able to diagnose this and to be able to understand this. We just need one poor transaction if it's something important. And we're going to collect the data there to analyze that, understand how that behaved, and understand how long that took. So let's take one of these and see what this looks like, see how this breaks down. So the view that we have here we have a transaction sequence view. So this is taking an individual indication that's coming in from the browser and showing us how many tiers does it touch, which ones, what is it doing on there, how does that time break down. We see a visual picture here, and we'll move to a tree view in a second. But this just gives us a sense of just how complex and just how busy these documenting transactions and documenting requests can be. Each one of these bars here, which we call segments, is an individual indication of a tier. So that could be a SQL query, that could be a DQL, could be any other kind of communication that you're going to have within your environment. It's very easy to see how it can be difficult and the challenge to really get on top of how things are behaving when there's so many different operations going on to eventually serve up that request to the end user. So now I'm just going to move through and have a look at the tree view of this, and let's start to look at things in a little bit more detail. So what type of data are we actually going to get at the lowest level? What's the lowest level things we're going to see? So to start with, we can see all the calls here we have to the Documentum API in the web top. So we can see all the various different iterations and things that we go through. As we start to actually get DQL statements, then we're able to pull out and extract those Documentum query language statements, understand what we're doing. This can be useful not just for understanding things that are slow running, but also for making sure your customizations are working correctly, ensuring that something's not being unset when you set it with the customization and this type of activity. And then also, once that DQL hits the content server, we can follow that down through. Let's see the SQL queries that are generated. Let's see how long they're taking. Let's see how much time we're spending there. Indeed, as we move a little bit further down into this tree, we can actually then start to see some of the examples of things we see. In this case here, we start to see some chattiness. We have a single DQL statement coming into the content server, but here it's generated 12 SQL statements. It's called the database 12 times with the same statement. These are types of things that we like to notice and see, and these are things that can work great in testing. They can even work great in UAT. But as we get under load, these are the types of application issues that could eventually cause us performance issues and scalability issues. These are the things that just don't scale, but we don't see them until we get under those big production loads. So we've had a look at going through and down into individual transactions. But what's some of the other types of high-level analysis that we can get out of this? So the view we have here is a topology screen. So SharePath is able to automatically map out a topology of our Documentum installation. So this one is actually very simple. It's in a pre-production environment. In this case, in the production environment, we're looking at 18 different application servers, multiple web servers, multiple content servers. It's really valuable to be able to understand those communication paths between those tiers. Is my load balancing working correctly? Am I starting to get things like hot nodes? Are all the communication paths as I expect? Is there anything I'm talking to that I didn't expect to be talking to? Make sure these types of things are going on. Really get an understanding, a runtime CMDB, if you like, of your Documentum environment and how that's behaving. Some other nice things we can do around the analysis is actually trying to look at the time that we're spending on all the different tiers. So here we can see on this chart, we're actually having a breakdown of the cumulative time we're spending in the different components that are sitting within our architecture. So here you see, we spend most of our time on the content server, with our time on the database server, and some time on the application server. This is typical of what we've been seeing in this environment. Other environments may well be different. But this tool we have here is called Business Intelligence View. Really, it can be thought of as an OLAP view. It allows us to do slicing and dicing. It enables us to go and interrogate that data and see where that time is being spent. So, for example, take the content servers, if we have lots of them, and break that down and see, is the load even across those servers? Or maybe we want to understand which transactions really spend most of their time on the content server. Is it import? Is it export? Various different types of things. Just to give us an example of that, let's go through and drill down into the database server again. Let's see what we can pull out of here. So looking at the calls we have into Oracle, here we can see our different queries. And again, this is just one simple type of drill down. I could spend all day showing screens of this. But we could then go from here, pick a SQL query, and actually then go and see which incoming transaction generated that SQL query. What's the route that takes? What's actually causing that? and all these types of information, so that then when things are going wrong or when things need optimization, we can go ahead and we can recognize where we need to actually spend that effort and spend that time, and really invest our time effectively fixing things rather than investing our time just trying to understand where the issues might be so that we can then go ahead and fix them. And with that, I'd now like to hand back over to Frank.
Great, thanks, Tom. Again, in summary, as a reminder to people, if you have questions, please enter them into the chat window on the GoToWebinar. As we look back on this presentation, all the Documentum environments, often many of the Documentum environments are quite complex, and monitoring performance in these environments becomes an even greater challenge as you're trying to monitor what's going on across a diverse set of infrastructure. To succeed, obviously, we need to think a little bit about design, think about how we're going to measure and monitor right at the beginning. Also look at how the system performs when we're ramping up versus when we're in full production. We should be looking at results on a regular basis, and obviously monitoring is a key component of that. And as we talked about today, Docuconnect and SharePath can provide some of the information that you need to do this. Just a moment to talk about our sponsors here, introducing Portford Solutions Group. They do provide complete document management services, including Documentum. That is an area of great expertise for them, and their product, their application, Docuconnect for Documentum, can really help. And finally, Correlsense, which provides SharePath, application performance management software product, which can help people solve problems and get to the root causes relatively quickly. And finally, just wanted to take a moment to see what questions we might have from people. Well, just before we take off today, I just wanted to let you know if you have questions about anything that you've heard on today. Again, we will be posting the slides and the video tomorrow on the homepage of Correlsense.com. You can also see on the slide some of the information. If you have any questions about what Portford Solutions Group does, you can email them at sales@portfordsolutions.com, or you can email us at info@correlsense.com. I don't see any questions, so again, on behalf of everyone here at Correlsense, as well as our partners at Portford Solutions Group, thank you for joining us today.